All right, well, we're going to jump right into a research panel. Julie Hoover is our moderator, and I'll turn it over to you, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you. So welcome to the Research and Technology Applications portion of our programming. As we're going along, you can put your questions in the Q&A feature, and these questions will be answered by the appropriate speakers offline, and responses will be posted to the Symposium's website, but we have a little bit of time at the end. We'll answer some of those questions. So first, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Matthew Mickens. Matthew is the Chief Science Officer of Elevate Farms. Matthew, you can begin whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Matthew Mickens and truly excited to be able to tell you my story today, both my academic and professional journey as a former North Carolina Space Grant Fellow, and how it has taken me through NASA and where I am today as the Chief Science Officer at Elevate Farms, and how it all connects back to the NASA mission. So I'll do a little bit of time traveling. We'll bring you to the year 2007, hopefully with not revealing my age too much. But like most young graduate student researchers, or even younger, research begins at the search. And so for me, my journey began actually with the Google search. And that's really common to start there. And so as a graduate student at North Carolina A&T, I was awarded a graduate assistantship, but I didn't have any funding for my thesis project. And so I had to start on Google and find sources of funding. And one of those was the North Carolina Space Grant Fellowship. And this is actually what the old logo looked like at that time. I like the newer logo now these days, but this is where it started. And so I found this opportunity, and once I did it, I thought I could take a shot at it. Of course, I had to go back to Google and Google, how do you write a research proposal? And I had never written one before, and the formatting for the actual grant was pretty straightforward. So I gave it a shot, and I got it. And at that time, the award was a whopping $5,000. And I believe it's actually more now, but the $5,000 worth of funding was more than enough I needed for my thesis project. So in regards to my actual thesis project, I had an interest in lighting materials and the detection of radiation. And so here, actually, I had an earth science concentration for my master's, and here's just a picture of some minerals in a museum. But there's a unique property about these minerals. So for instance, if you shine a UV light on them, these minerals actually glow. They have the emission of visible light. And minerals are unique because some of them actually respond to certain wavelengths of UV. So I had an idea. I was like, well, geologists and miners have used UV light to find minerals in mines for decades. How about if I use these minerals to actually find UV light, so to speak? Could I reverse the concept? And so I actually wanted to find a way, and this is the electromagnetic spectrum that you see in front of you, but just to the left of or beyond the color violet in the visible region, UV can be subdivided into specific regions that each have unique biological effects. As I'm sure you're aware, UV can cause skin aging, sun tanning, and skin cancer. And so I wanted to be able to find a way to detect each of these regions using these luminescent minerals that emit light after they're exposed to them. And so I wanted to see if I can discriminate each of the UV regions with these minerals and incorporate them into a detection sensor. And so before the time of the Apple Watch, I had the idea of maybe putting a UV sensor into a watch or some kind of monitor that could be used in space as well as for terrestrial applications, like when people went to the beach. So this is me as a young master's student. You can see my hair is a little bit different back in those days. But for my project, I actually analyzed and went through over 20 different minerals from all over the world. And I analyzed their spectroscopic properties, in other words, how they respond to light using what is called a luminescence spectrophotometer. And I learned how they interacted with light, and I published those properties, those spectroscopic properties. And I even designed a sensor, a UV sensor prototype, and submitted a patent application for it. But one of the things that I found during this, my North Carolina Space Camp research is that these minerals emitted different colors of light that had varying sensitivity to the photometer I was using. So I wanted to actually refine that research even more during the course of my PhD. So that brings me to the year 2009. I actually continued my research at North Carolina A&T State University. And there, I actually, of course, went back to Google because I had to find, again, another source of funding. I had a graduate assistantship, but I didn't have any funding for my dissertation project. But luckily, at North Carolina A&T, instead of having to figure out a research proposal during my PhD program, they had a class, a grant writing proposal class. And I used that class to write my grant proposal to fund my research. And so I actually went back to the North Carolina Space Grant and applied again and received the award. But I also looked into another fellowship known as the NASA Harriet J Jenkins Pre-Doctoral Fellowship Program. And I used the proposal that I wrote during the course of the semester of that class. And I actually got that fellowship as well, which actually provided a lot more funding. In fact, it provided $12,000 per semester as a stipend, $5,000 for research, and $8,000 towards the trip or a NASA internship at any NASA center that was relevant to my research. So at that time, I had to make a decision. I had the North Carolina Space Grant and the Jenkins Fellowship in front of me, and I couldn't accept both. So I actually accepted the North Carolina Space Grant Award, but declined the funding just so that I wouldn't have any issues with double dipping in federal government funds. But the Space Grant Fellowship allowed me that opportunity to become a Jenkins Fellow. And this is actually me with Dr. Harriet J. Jenkins. And in case for those who don't know, Dr. Jenkins was an assistant administrator in the Office of Equal Opportunities at NASA headquarters. And for 20 years, she was a very strategic part in recruiting the very first African-American astronauts. And what's really unique about her is that she had this fellowship named in her honor while she was still alive. And she actually had direct interaction with her fellows during their fellowship tenure, which was an awesome experience. And sadly, she passed away in the year 2016. So as I'm wrapping up my PhD research, I went from having an earth science concentration to now I had to learn inorganic chemistry because I wanted to find a way to synthesize the minerals that I was looking at in the laboratory. And so basically I used a technique known as the sol gel technique. I basically dissolved a bunch of ions in solution and converted that solution to a gel. And then that gel, I fired it into what is called a nanocrystalline powder, which if I shine UV light on it, it actually emits the same light at that particular wavelength. But I had the ability to control what color that particular mineral emitted, and I could change it. And so I didn't know it at the time, but what I was making is what are called phosphor materials. And those phosphor materials are actually primarily used in light emitting diodes, also known as LEDs. And if you can notice the actual material here, the pinkish material, the pink material is actually red and blue combined. And I didn't know, but red and blue are actually colors that plants were using for photosynthesis primarily. And so that is what actually led me to my internship, where I interned at the NASA Kennedy Space Center, their main focus was food production and plant growth. And so I picked up another skill where I could contribute my lighting expertise, but also had to learn how to grow plants. And so within 3 years, I was at NASA Kennedy Space Center as a postdoctoral fellow. And my main objective there was to become the light recipe expert for growing crops. You know, the astronauts have options on the space station in terms of, growth chambers that grow plants, but the astronauts are busy. they don't know what light recipes to use. So I studied that so that the astronauts know what colors of light that impacted plant growth for food production. I also was involved while I was at KSC in preparing payloads for plant growth. Here's a picture of me actually loading growing media called arsenite into a plant pillow, which we would launch and fly on to the space station. And that was one of the coolest things while I was at KSC, because I very often got to watch launch, and I would know which rocket I had a payload on, and I can watch it being launched to space. And I can say, oh man, I physically touched a payload that's on that rocket. And so that was a really, really cool experience. And this is actually the Falcon Heavy launch that was in 2018. I was 5 miles away from that launch. It was truly amazing. And so during my tenure at KSC, I became a plant scientist. So you can see my trajectory. I had to pick up different disciplines. And so as a plant scientist, I had interns that I worked with during my research. And I actually won an award from NASA. NASA awarded me the NASA Mentor of the Year. And I ended up mentoring 14 interns over the course of my 3-year tenure while there. And one of the perks of working with me, what the interns had while they worked with me, is that when I published, and here's a few of my greatest hits while I was at KSC, the research I published, I actually put them as co-authors. So they had publications under their belt before they even graduated. And so that was awesome for them and for me. But primarily my focus, as you can see here in the papers on the right, I found a way to use light and light recipes to change the size, shape, texture, and even the flavor and nutrient content of the particular crops. And so when I was presenting this work, especially the work with red romaine in Italy, Rome, Italy, I ran into a professor who saw my presentation, and he was Professor Mike Dixon at the University of Guelph. He actually linked me with the CEO of Elevate Farms. And within a few days, I had an interview and another job. So Elevate Farms wanted to use my expertise in lighting, but also they wanted to build these farms all around the world. And so here I will show you a quick video to introduce Elevate Farms and what we're doing as a global launcher of these indoor vertical farms.
Our fully automated facility can grow 450,000 kilos of leafy greens per year in any climate. Algorithms determine perfect growing conditions for a wide range of high-nutrient crops. Artificial intelligence-driven light recipes determine custom size, flavor, and nutrient values. The facility uses closed-loop water and air technology, saving up to 36 million liters of water annually. Data is continuously monitored and analyzed throughout the growth cycle. Lighting and climate adjustments are automatic. Within 20 to 30 days, nutrient-rich plants are transferred robotically to the harvest area. Each facility can grow up to 18 layers of leafy greens. Our indoor farming system is fully scalable and uses 1% of the water needed for traditional farming, all with minimal human intervention. Elevate Farms, local food security on a global scale.
And I do apologize for that. I had to mute because there was a lawnmower going over here. But again, so Elevate Farms, our mission is basically local food security on a global scale. And we want to find ways to address how do we grow food safely in extreme environments. So that takes me to the year 2020, and where we actually elevated our very first large-scale vertical farm, and just in Welland, Ontario, outside of Niagara Falls, and it's for a company called Intravision Greens Niagara. And so basically, we take this box inside of a box approach. So we basically we build a warehouse or sometimes we retrofit a warehouse and we put this controlled environment inside that warehouse so that the crops that we grow have the precise environment they need, different from the warehouse environment. And so you can see here the racking system. I do apologize for the panoramic view, but it is 150 feet long. But here's the racking system being built inside the box. And then here actually is the box that is closed in the actual enclosed controlled environment where we house our crops. And then to give you a view, this is inside of the box, or we call the growth tunnel. And so you can see the racking system. It has the LED lights, and we do have several levels of automation. And just to give you an idea of the scale, this is a person right here. And so again, it's 150 foot long, and this one is 13 layers high. And I'd have a video just to show some of the automation that we use. This is our elevator lift actually inserting plants into the growth tunnel. And I do apologize if it's a little choppy, but I just wanted to actually show that our racking system is on a 0.5 degree slope. So the system of wheels actually move our plants through the system using only gravity. So that reduces the electrical consumption that we would normally use for a conveyor. And so we insert our plants into the system, and then 28 to 32 days later, this is what we have. This is now our modern day lettuce field. And this is the farming, this is how we are farming today. And so here you can see an endless row or layer of lettuce. And then this is the side view with LED lighting, but also you can see above that there are these air tubes with holes in them. This is where we actually provide airflow for our crops, but we also inject the carbon dioxide directly into the canopy for the plants. So the plants are really happy in this environment. And I just want to show a few other crops that we have been growing on some of our layers. This is red Russian kale. And just so you know, red Russian kale actually made some history earlier this year. In January, red Russian kale was the first crop to be transplanted on orbit aboard on the space station. And I actually recommended that our team grow it to see how it does. And I was there at NASA while we were performing crop testing selection tests on this crop. And so, and it tastes great. There's another feature of our farm I wanted to show. So here we have our lettuce layer, but we actually have changed the light recipe that was mentioned in the video. We can change it so that we have one proprietary LED recipe for growth or vegetative growth. And then we can change that to boost the nutrient compound during the last part of the cycle. And so it changes, you can see this, the color of the leaf actually changes to a nice deep red. And then also we have various mixes that we grow. That's actually outrageous red romaine here. That was also grown on the space station. We have mini romaine crops. And we have basil as well, which, it smells amazing. It's very aromatic, nice minty flavor. But we can also play with planting density, and in other words, packing plants into a really tight space to boost up the yield and the pounds per square foot of produce. Here's our sea of arugula. And for some reason, the arugula that we grow is extraordinarily spicy, which I like it. And so this is actually one of those features where we can change the taste of our crops in our system as well. And then this picture I wanted to show because it actually, the CEO of our company said to me, he said, it looks like what we're doing looks like something from the future. And this is one of those pictures that I thought captures that, because you have all of this metal and all of these, wheels and beams around you, and then you just see green. And I imagine this is probably what the astronauts see as well when they grow crops on, in space modules. But the future is now, and we're doing it. This is the future of farming, and it's amazing to be able to contribute to that. And then to close my presentation, I do want to time travel with you one more time. I'm going to take you back to the year of 1988. And NASA at KSC, they actually had what is called the Biomass Production Chamber. In the picture here at the top right, this is actually one of my mentors, Dr. Ray Wheeler, working with lettuce here. He has published over 400 papers, and I've drawn most of my knowledge of controlled environment agriculture from him. And then on the bottom here is actually another one of my mentors, Neil Yorio. But what I wanted to show with this, because, and they didn't know this at the time when they were doing this test module for growing plants in a controlled environment, they were vertical farming. And so the idea that vertical farming that we're doing today actually was born at NASA, and they didn't even know it at the time. This is wheat, but you can see it's stacked in a vertical architecture. And so again, it's a closed loop circle where, you know, NASA has helped our farming, but, you know, we can also take the technology we use for farming and apply it to, again, the astronauts growing crops for food production in space. And so that concludes my presentation, and I do thank you for your attention. It's delightful to be able to share my story with you. And real quickly, it is, if you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, here's my contact information and the website for Elevate Farms.
Now we're going to hear from Stephanie Smith, who is a contamination control engineer with the United Launch Alliance. I'm going to take over, Stephanie.
Okay. All right, so today I'm going to start with introducing myself. Then I'm going to give a little overview of ULA and what we do. I'll then move on to contamination control and planetary protection. So I started my higher education at Sandhills Community College, and it was then when I received the NASA Space Grant Scholarship, and I transferred to North Carolina State University, studying chemical engineering and a minor in biomanufacturing. While I was there, my senior year of college, I was looking for summer internships and applied to many different places, one being ULA. Got the internship, and then upon graduating college, or upon graduating undergrad, I began working full-time at United Launch Alliance. And I am working as a contamination control engineer, and I also am studying space systems engineering at Johns Hopkins University. An interesting background of my education path and career today is that before I got the ULA internship when I was in college, if you asked me what my dream job was, it would have been a very different response than what I do today. When I was at NC State studying chemical engineering, biomanufacturing, I saw myself going into a biopharmaceutical field. You know, my goal at that time was to get a job basically working in fermentation and processing of pharmaceuticals or vaccines. But when I was applying for internships, I came across ULA and I was like, oh my gosh, that's a rocket company. There's no way I'm going to get that job, but might as well apply anyways. But I ended up, you know, interning, and now here I am full-time working as a rocket scientist at ULA. Another kind of interesting, funny story, when I was in community college and received the Space Grant Scholarship, from that moment on, my dad, you know, joked about, you know, oh, Stephanie's the rocket scientist in the family. Oh, she's a rocket scientist. And it wasn't until several years later that that joke actually became a reality. And that's what I do today. So ULA designs, manufactures, and launches the Atlas V and Delta IV rockets. We are also manufacturing and getting ready to fly the Vulcan Centaur rocket, which has been in development and is now going through testing, and that inaugural launch will be in the fourth quarter of this year. So very exciting, make sure to look out for that. ULA has launched 142 successful missions, and we have a 100% mission success rate. Our missions touch all sorts of different areas of life. So we launch weather satellites, communication satellites, NASA exploration missions, as well as GPS satellites. So when you're looking at a weather image, ULA helped make that happen. When you're driving and using your GPS to navigate, ULA helped make that happen too. So this chart shows all of the NASA missions, and a fun that ULA has launched. A fun fact is that ULA and our heritage rockets have launched a spacecraft to every single planet in our solar system, and even some beyond. Another fun fact is that ULA and our heritage rockets have launched every single US-led mission to Mars. So that includes the InSight mission, the Curiosity rover, and the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover. So my role in the world of rockets is contamination control engineering. And what I do is ensure that the spacecraft is, has minimal exposure to molecular and particulate contamination. And there's many reasons why we do it. First and foremost, our customer, so the spacecraft, has requirements and has requirements for cleanliness and staying clean. And the reason why it's important to keep a spacecraft clean is that there's a lot of sensitive instruments on a spacecraft. So things like camera lenses or IR spectrometers or other science instruments, if they have contamination on them, if they have molecular and particulate matter on them, they don't function well, and maybe don't even function at all. But you reduce quality of the data that you're taking, and could even reduce lifespan of the spacecraft. It's been shown that solar arrays, when they have molecular contamination on them, they have reduced power output and reduced lifespan. And I guess one more thing I want to mention while I'm on this slide, if you look at the rocket picture on the right, my job really revolves around the spacecraft. So the hardware that we are really focused on in contamination control is the payload fairings that you see there, and then that conic structure, which is the payload attach fitting that the spacecraft actually sits on. So I've been talking about molecular contamination and particulate contamination, and some of you may wonder what is that? So just to give a better understanding, molecular contamination is any like oil or oily film, and it comes from outgassing of materials. So a great example of this is non-metals in your car. So the new car smell comes from molecular contamination. That is materials in the, say, dashboard or cushions in your car that are releasing molecules into the air, and those and what you smell are those molecules that is the new car smell. And to give you an idea of when we are talking about spacecraft contamination, the amount of molecular contamination I'm talking about is really, really small. So if you look at this picture of a dust mite, that dust mite is about 10 microns in width. It's microscopic, you can't see it. Our requirements for a typical mission is to make sure that our rocket hardware isn't depositing any more than 0.015 microns of molecular contamination. So we're talking really, really small amounts of molecules. And additionally, we look at and control the particle contamination. Particle contamination is essentially dust, skin flakes, things like that. And again, we're talking amounts that are not visible to the naked eye. So how do we do it? It all starts with the design of the rocket. So we make sure to work with our design engineers to select materials that will be low outgassing, that won't let off a lot of molecules. We make sure that we can access all of the surfaces so that they can be cleaned. And we make sure, our mechanical design, so making sure that two surfaces aren't rubbing against each other and causing flaking and things like that. And then, of course, we clean the hardware. And we take samples, send them off to a lab, get those samples back, make sure we verify that our cleaning process is working. And then there's also a lot of control in our processing as far as keeping the facilities that our hardware is in clean, and making sure that we pack and store everything very clean when it does need to be stored. So here is a picture of a spacecraft encapsulation. So in the middle, it's kind of dark there, but that dark area in the center is a spacecraft. And then the white things around it is our payload fairing, the blue part is support structure, basically just holding those payload fairings up. And so this is how we process in a clean room. As you can see, all the people in the room have what we call bunny suits on, hairnets, booties, and this payload processing facility also has a lot of controls as far as airflow and filtration and monitoring contamination. And then another big part of my job is contamination analyses. So I won't go into too much detail, but me and my group essentially predict where all of the molecules coming from sources on the rocket, where those molecules will move and where they'll deposit onto the spacecraft. Same thing with particulate contamination. We basically model where it all goes. So, we start with the spacecraft geometry, the rocket geometry, and then the flight profile. So time, temperature, pressure, all these things come into play into our analyses, and we predict how much contamination will get on the spacecraft from, from the point in time where our hardware comes in contact with the spacecraft, all the way up through launch and up until spacecraft separation. Another role that the contamination control team at ULA plays is we work as planetary protection engineers. And we do this only for certain missions. I'm actually going to jump ahead a little bit. So any missions that are going to planets or celestial bodies like moons or asteroids, any planet or asteroid or whatever it may be that could have the potential to harbor life or could have had potential to harbor life in the past, we protect it from biological organisms. So planetary protection is minimizing the transfer of living organisms between Earth and celestial bodies. And this is really, really important because we want to make sure that we preserve those celestial bodies so that we can search for life on other planets and search for maybe signs of past life. And if we bring a bunch of microbes or organisms, tiny organisms to these other planets, then it really jeopardizes our data, jeopardizes our capability to study those planets as they are. So there's two primary objectives of planetary protection. That's preventing forward contamination, so biological contaminants moving from Earth to celestial bodies. And then there's also backward contamination, which is potentially bringing back biological contaminants to Earth. So that's particularly important for sample return missions. And me being on the rocket side of things, my role in this is preventing that forward contamination. So making sure that there's no biocontaminants on, or absolutely minimizing to whatever extent possible, minimizing contaminants on our rocket hardware so that it doesn't get on the spacecraft, so the spacecraft doesn't bring it to other planets or celestial bodies. And the requirements will differ based on, the mission at hand. So a flyby mission across Mars versus, an actual rover mission across Mars will differ in the, how careful we are and basically what kind of requirements are set in place. So how do we control bioburden? We essentially have a lot of different tools at our disposal to limit microbial contamination and microbial spores. So on top of all of our normal, contamination control with molecular and particulate control, we additionally have more things to do when we're also limiting bioburden and spores. So more cleaning, more sampling, and kind of like a different type of cleaning as well. And that is all I had. I want to thank NC Space Grant for hosting me in this symposium, and it's been a great opportunity, and I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of these very interesting talks.
All right, thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you.
So next up, we have Ryan Theurer. Ryan is a satellite visualization programmer and a contractor with GVT at NOAA, and he's going to talk more about what he's doing in his work at NOAA. Whenever you're ready, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right. Yeah, so as Julie said, I'm a contractor at NOAA with GVT, and so let's dive into it. So my story begins in 2015, where I moved from Portland, Maine down to North Carolina and started attending Durham Tech Community College. While I was there, I signed up for a science and engineering team that was doing high altitude ballooning experiments that were funded by NC Space Grant. And the team was called the Unacceptable Risks. So here we are launching one of our first balloon tests back in 2015. So stemming from that project, we got more and more ambitious and signed up for something called HASP, the High Altitude Balloon Platform, which was also funded by NC Space Grant and hosted by LA or Louisiana Space Grant. So this project was creating a more complicated payload than our last project. This was to send sensors up into the upper troposphere to try to see if we could detect trace gases there and also take images as well. So luckily with that, we got to build that out, and we actually got to go to the Columbia Scientific Balloon Facility run by NASA out in New Mexico and launch it on this huge balloon that you can see over on the right. And thankfully did the whole project and everything went really well. We got to write a scientific paper for it. We got to really push ourselves for engineering and really test out our skills. I think it really helped solidify my want to continue to work in the sciences and really be able to test out, that career path. So here are some of the pictures that we were able to get from those experiments of ours. Some really beautiful upper atmosphere pictures. After Durham Tech, I went to UNC Chapel Hill to study information science. And while there, I got two internships, one at NASA headquarters in DC. And from making connections there, I ultimately went and got a internship at this program called Develop over at NASA's Langley Research Center. So just for time constraints, I'm afraid I can't get into the full acronym of what Develop stands for, but pretty much the idea behind Develop is that it is supposed to be an interdisciplinary projects for like Earth scientists as well as people in technology to combine our skills to do really amazing work. So our project was to help work on this thing called the Data Cube that NASA's developed. That is pretty much a satellite data platform that can be developed like across the world in multiple different countries. That gives countries satellite data to work with, as well as machine learning algorithms to apply to that data to complete tasks that they want to do. So for instance, we worked with the Colombian government, specifically IDEAM, which is the Institute of Hydrology, Meteorology, and Environmental Studies, to help them use satellite data to find where deforestation was happening within their country so that they could stop things like illegal deforestation or illegal mining within the rainforest. So we're able to do that, and I got a lot of experience, not only in technology, but also in Earth observation that really helped lead me to where I am today in my career. So currently, I'm now working at NOAA in a group called STAR, which is a Satellite Applications and Research Division. So our mission with STAR is to accelerate the transfer of satellite observation data from scientific research into routine processes that we can create products for the users to take control of. So whether that be other scientists doing research, the general public. One big thing that we do is hand over data to the EPA so they can do air quality testing so they can distribute that to the public. And so a lot of our work has to do with, like, for instance, my colleagues of mine do a lot of papers, for instance, on improving, working with the physics of, how we collect data to improve the accuracy of the satellite data we get for the scientists who are using it. Or recently, colleagues of mine worked on a paper called The Economic Impact of COVID Using Earth Observation Data. So kind of studying how the economic shutdown affected pollution throughout cities and how we could track that. So here are a few of the satellites that I am in contact mostly with in my job. So first is NOAA 20. I use the sensors on that, or the most commonly used sensors that I get data from on that is the visible infrared imaging radiometer suite. And that gets us, or that gets me data on everything from aerosols, which are like particulates in the upper atmosphere, like smoke and dust, for like tracking wildfires and the aerosols that come off of them, to vegetation, to fire radiative power. So being able to track when fires start, where they are, and how powerful they are. And then the other two satellites I do the most work with are the GOES 16 and GOES 17 satellites. Those stand for geostationary operational environmental satellites. So I use equivalent sensor between them called the baseline imager, or advanced baseline imager, to collect various data to use for my work. So kind of going into how we categorize these different satellites, as I had mentioned with the GOES satellites, they're geostationary. What that means is that their orbit around Earth is pretty much stationary over one spot, so they can continue doing detecting. So these satellites are generally used for weather observation and reporting. Other satellites we use are polar orbiting. So these ones are orbiting around the poles of the Earth, and hopefully are trying to capture one full sweep of the whole Earth in one day. And these have higher resolution sensors, and these are generally more used for scientific work. As you can see here, as the satellite goes around the poles, it's getting these like strips of Earth that it's detecting, and we call these swaths. And so here's an example when I talked about the GOES satellites of how they're positioned over the US and how they detect weather and what regions they cover. So we have a GOES 16 goes east on the right. We have a GOES 17 on the left, and then we actually have GOES 14, one of the older ones, sitting in standby in the background. And so using the GOES satellites, for instance, we get really beautiful images like the one you see here. So this is what we call a full disk image of North and South America. So it's a little cut off at the top and bottom just to fit into the slide. We get some really beautiful high definition images. And here's one of CONUS, the continental United States. This again is for like weather tracking. This is from GOES 16. And here you can see this is actually an image from 2019 of the Hurricane Dorian as it approaches the East Coast. So one of the products that I make visualizations for a lot is something called aerosol optical thickness, or aerosol optical depth. So as I had mentioned before, one of the things that we detect for is smoke coming off of fires, or aerosols. So we can detect how thick smoke is in particular areas from the data that we get from satellites. So as you can see, here's a example of some data from a fire in California in 2017, captured from our data, both from two different satellites of ours that we've combined the data together to make some sort of like composite image from. As you can see, the values of AOT is from 0 to 1. They're unitless, but they give a great idea of where aerosols are thickest, where air quality might be most dangerous for human breathing, and helps track where the aerosols are kind of flowing from these fires. Here we have another great example of some fire data, some AOD being picked up from the Australian fires that happened in 2019 into 2020. And again, these are just a really great example of using some of the polar orbiting satellites that have such great resolution to pick up the fire or the smoke coming off of these fires. And as you can maybe see, there are these kind of lines that seem like they're not kind of matching up at certain sectors as the data comes through. These are, as I mentioned before, the polar orbiting satellites create these swaths that we combine together from data from our different polar orbiting satellites to get a full image of what's going on. Here's an example of some data that we also get over with our JPSS satellites that can really give some interesting pictures of different environments across the world. So, for instance, here in India, during the winter months, there's a lot of pollution caused by either fires or industrial pollution or travel that cause aerosols to go into the atmosphere. And as you can see, it collects up in this area in the left and goes across over into the right and runs into the Himalayan mountains, where it gets kind of caught in between there and pushed up against there and collected there. So using our Earth observation data, we get really great pictures of some really interesting phenomena that happen across the globe. Finally, I want to end on some current projects that I'm working on with our team. So as I had stated before, our division's main purpose is to not only translate the data into something ingestible by scientists in the community as well, but also to create platforms for providing that data directly to users. So this is an image of a demo that we're hoping to put out soon for a website called My Environment Dashboard. This dashboard pretty much takes a slew of different satellite data and a slew of different products. So what you can see here is some trace gas products, NO2 in particular, that we can track across the world. And then we can actually grab that pollution data from for our website within 100 kilometers around the radius of a city, and then give users the ability to not only see global averages of this pollution data, but also visualize it on a map, and also pick specific cities they want to view where this pollution data is occurring, and kind of do a zoom in of that. And then furthermore, download this data so they can either do experiments with it or share it with colleagues or do whatever they need to do with it. So not only do we have this project coming out soon, we also have a disasters website that helps us, or that we're going to use to track things from, for example, like fires out in California, and then archive data for that for scientists to come and pick up that data and be able to visualize it on maps as well. So I think overall, I think it's really easy to see how projects funded by NC Space Grant really help full circle in leading people like me into the careers that we find ourselves, from taking pictures with just HD cameras, fixated into styrofoam containers that we launched into weather balloons, to now doing Earth observation data science on using NASA satellites and NOAA satellites. I think it's really crucial that things like NC Space Grant continue to happen and fund projects especially in community college, where students and teachers can really take on these really ambitious projects to find where their interests lie and to help lead them and guide them on their educational journey. So thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, really well put there at the end, Ryan. We're all thankful for Space Grant. And I'd like to thank all these panelists. These were great talks. If you have questions, please continue to put the questions in the Q&A feature. We're running tight on time, so we won't be able to address them live now, but Space Grant's going to make sure that your questions get answered, and they'll post those to the website later on. So thanks to everyone, and we'll turn it back over to Space Grant.